like to do actually is start a conversation off with the contributions from our away members, because they did the same assignment and include that contribution in as part of the discussion. Also demonstrate, sort of lead off with one way of thinking about this. I don't know the persons whom she interviewed for her in her personal definitions of theory, but she starts with a dictionary definition, which, okay, might seem obvious, but what are the implications of using a dictionary definition for where you're pulling your conception of theory from?
Widely accepted.
Good. Social consensus. What else? What might be troublesome about it?
Too general.
It's going to be very general. What else? The way of achieving that consensus, right, is oftentimes that it will use such abstractions that it's kind of in order to paper over where the places are that we really do disagree about what counts as theory. So let's see what the dictionary, Merriam-Webster says. Theory is the analysis of a set of facts in their relation to one another. We notice that that begs the question of what the heck is a set of facts. Second definition is abstract thought, which is easier for us to agree on, and something everybody participates in. General abstract principles of a body of fact, a science, or an art, a belief, policy, or procedure, i.e., practices can be theories. If we are willing to accept that definition, which maybe we're not, in addition to abstract thought, particular procedures or practices can be theoretical themselves. So that's a kind of a nice twist on. A plausible or scientifically accepted general principle or body of principles offered to explain phenomena. Hypothesis assumed for the sake of argument or investigation.
Yes.
Okay, what's interesting about that final one that the dictionary contributes for us, that Merriam gives us from the dictionary?
For sake of argument? And what was the last part of it?
Or investigation. For the sake of argument or investigation.
I think that the investigation proves note.
Right, so clear link to research practice.
Well, a
It's highlighted.
clear link to that it's somebody's actually tried to go out and gather some sort of proof of this, either through observation or statistical or whatever else.
So it presumes, right, again, actions have been taken, things have been done that are related. A lot of the times in practice, what you hear used is that we speak of, so in theory, this medicine does X, Y, Z. What is always the implication of that?
Somebody's tested it, the theory.
Okay, when I say this in conversation, though, what does it mean when I say, in theory, this medicine is supposed to do X, Y, Z?
The exact opposite.
It usually means that
Yeah.
what we find in practice has
Yeah.
no bearing on. Right? We're usually
Theory.
implicitly
It's supposed to-
creating a contrast, right? What we're doing in that conversational move is denying.
Yes.
So one of the criteria, one of the very definitions of theory is that oftentimes there's argued to be, believed to be, a divorce between, the abstract thought versus conditions on the ground. start going around then with the definitions that y'all bring that are not from interpersonal sources, but are from official sources, like written down definitions from a discipline or whatever else. No? No. Ronnie, do you have one?
Yes, I do.
Would you be willing to share for us?
Would you like me to get up?
Yes. I'm going to get up and write on the board.
Right on the board?
Yeah. Maybe not every word, but
Yeah.
at least the essence of it, like I did.
This is from journalism major. Tell me if this is too much.
Not too much so far.
Okay. Sorry, not good handwriting.
We're not judging your handwriting.
Yeah, I can't barely read it.
Really, mine either.
Did you say use the dictionary?
That's the Merriam-Webster's
Okay, cool.
dictionary. That is,
That's what I thought you said.
yep.
That's not what I thought.
Is this enough or keep going?
Let's start with just that. Well, can you read out the rest of it for us? And we'll see if
Theories,
there's keywords.
theories sometimes change to take into account new evidence or tests that show gaps or weakness in the original premise.
Cool, okay. And you had another one as well?
You want me to write that too?
Yeah.
All right.
Ah, good. Good. Who is this one from?
This is actually from my teammate.
Okay, wait, what major is relevant?
Psychology.
Okay. What do you notice? Well, I'll let him finish writing it.
research and experimentation, but we often create our own personal theories based and supported by experiences we have had. Theories often take time and a lot of supporting evidence or experiences to develop.
Cool. What do y'all notice about the definitions? You can pick one or both. What do you notice particularly about those, especially in comparison to conversations we've been having so far about theory?
It starts to bring more of a human element to it.
You know, you can kind of tell a little bit more what it looks like when we live it. Abstract thought was not very helpful. This is much more, in some ways, clear.
Well, concrete, look at your hands on it,
Yeah.
you know.
And that, I think that's what you mean by saying that there's a more human element to it, right?
Yeah, well, and I think that the first one feels very removed from any sort of like human element of it. Where, I think that when he was saying the rest of the first one is that that theories aren't set in stone, that they can be modified and altered due to the course of.
And both of the persons quoted so far talk about that and,
Mhm.
and seem to emphasize words like change over time, takes time. All those words indicating, develop. So a lot of emphasis on the idea that there's not a theory. And that kind of makes sense, given what we've already talked about, the ways in which all of our theories are interrelated, and helps much in terms of our dictionary tells us, set of facts in relation. Okay, why does that set of facts is what's changing, right? Also the relations, and so that's why the versions of theory that we use in practice are more likely to talk about that. What are your reactions for this second one? What do y'all like about that?
Yes, this one seems strictly used for research. This is a research one, so this is a good hands-on one too. Why am I doing research? So why am I coming up with the theory? Because I need an idea or a framework or idea. You should predict future behavior or actions. So,
It can also be applied a little bit more easily than just simply a premise.
I think probably that word choice framework tells us a lot about why we might enjoy doing theory, why theory matters. Anybody else troubled by predict future behavior?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no? Not troubled? You want to defend that?
I think that in some of it, so for the one where we were supposed to present a communication theory, I did the communication privacy management. So in that
Cool.
one, predicting the future for it is that if somebody tells me their confidential information and then I tell it to the very next person, in the theory, you can probably expect some turbulence with the now, in relationship that I have had. So in that sort of sense, I can see how it predicts the future of behaviors, and it can kind of say, in generalized situation that A, B will equal to C, but I mean, we can never say. Most people are walking around with computing power unbelievably heard of, 10 to 15 years ago. So predicting the future behavior can only really predict so far in front of us.
And whether one counts it as a prediction, predicting some turbulence is a far cry from being able to say what form that.
Right.
Like, maybe it would help if I backed up. Do y'all kind of have a sense of what she means, communication privacy management?
I have a handout.
Marvelous.
Perfect, sweet.
Marvelous.
Where you going again this opportunity? So I just,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, take us through it, please.
Oh, hey, look at that. them, Sandra Petrino?
Petronio.
Petronio?
Mhm.
So basically, it's basically how you would think of it is if I tell Ronnie a secret and then Ronnie shares that secret with the rest of the class, I'm probably going to have some issues about, because I feel like I control the information that is private and I have made him a co-owner with it. But if I didn't tell Ronnie that this was a secret and this was private information, then the boundaries that he decides to set for it is going to be less permeable. So there's some there's some information where I freely admit to people that I'm a yoga teacher. And that is information that I feel is fine to be spread around. There's other information that I'm probably only going to ever tell my husband, and he's only going to tell me. And so that barrier between what we say to each other is far thicker than anything else that he would say to his coworkers or somebody else. So the 5 core principles of it is that people believe that they have the right to own their own personal information. This is why the issues with Facebook and everything else is quite so relevant to today's society. And that people control their privacy information through personal privacy rules. Some people are far more loose-lipped with what they feel that is fine to give, and some people are like a tight-trapped book. So, and then when others are told about a person's private information, they become the co-owners of that. You know, I've been watching a lot of The Good Wife, and I was been thinking about, you know, how lawyers speak and everything else, and that you are now the accessory to something. So then the co-owners of private information need to mutually have privacy rules. So you shouldn't just assume somebody knows how high up the level of this, you know, if I tell Ronnie I murdered somebody last weekend, he might go running to the cops. But I say, you really can't tell anybody this. You know, he's going to have to decide of where that boundary is going to lie. You're implicit in all of my dealings.
Complicit even.
And when co-owners of private information don't hold true to the set privacy rules, that's when you get boundary turbulence. So in boundary rule formation, there's 4 main there's 5, I think I cut one off. But there's basic sort of things as far as the context. So doctor-patient privacy rules, I mean, we set up our structure on how different people can relate to each other. My husband can't be put on the stand and testify against me because we are now, that sort of information has been secured between us. The context, so again, I tell everybody that I'm a yoga teacher, but I might not tell them other things about me. So I think that but I might not bring that up in a staff meeting as well. So I think that,
Indeed. I was going to ask,
right.
there are these various structural rules about information sharing that we have that have oftentimes nothing to do with how we manage information flow interpersonally. Is it not my understanding that the university doesn't actually officially, isn't allowed to know that you have outside employment?
Oh no, well they employ me as well. Actually, the reason why they're continuing to be able to employ me is because I went from, I turned into an exempt employee. Yeah. So no, it's fine. If I start
Whereas if you're
thinking,
doing yoga
Yeah.
teaching, I'm
Yeah.
officially
I
not allowed to
don't
know that.
know.
Yeah.
La, 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 la,
Yeah.
la, la. Yeah.
And we know a lot of situations like that, right? Interpersonally it's okay, but officially it can't be acknowledged.
right.
Don't get me started.
Well, there's entire, you know, catchphrases on the DL. We're just gonna keep this. Yeah. So motivation. When it turns into how high up this information is, it can be used as a commodity. As you know, I now have something against you. Leonard's going to do what I want because I know his personal information, and now he's afraid of that seeping outside of his boundary control. So now his motivation to be able to do it. And then some people, you know, it's gossips. So you are now more in control because you have a greater range of privacy information that you can use or not. And then gender, men and women. So they say that, you know, like women will get into groups and talk to their girlfriends, and guys just don't do that, or whatever else. But generally speaking, there's a difference between the way that men and women share their privacy information.
Oh, yeah. What was the 5th one? Do you remember? Well, I know, but,
Oh.
so those actually fall over here?
Actually, I don't.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember?
I think you got it.
There were 5.
Right, boundary formation, cost benefits,
I think the boundary
Context,
formation might be the actually
relation.
5th one.
gender, right, that's 5.
You mean the boundary formation is actually
Yeah.
the fifth one?
Oh, I
okay.
see.
So, in it, okay. And then, so boundary coordination, it is better to agree upon what the rules of the information are gonna be before you just tell somebody something. So it is a lot
Right.
harder to take something back and say like, okay, no, never mind, I can't trust you. You and I aren't on the same page of this. Forget what I just said. You can't
Yeah.
strike something from the record in that way.
And moreover, it is an imposing of a burden to share information without having previously. So she tells you that she's murdered somebody last weekend. Now you're in a really awkward position, right? And that's true with other forms of information as well. You know, if you get told so-and-so's quitting, right? There's this awkwardness that gets imposed, and you didn't have a chance to agree or to not agree
But it's
before
like,
that gets inflicted on you.
it's like they took the initiative to tell you, basically stating that they have some sort of, some form of trust in you, you know,
Right.
with that information.
Right. And so one nice thing about it is it does secure relationships, as she said. It's not just in nefarious cases like I'll deliberately try to control you based on the information I have about you. But we also strengthen the relationship bond because she's showing trust. She's strengthening the relationship, right? It gets secured and stabilized through this co-ownership.
Or it does quite the opposite.
Well,
And yeah, I've been interested in this as far as I switched my department a little over a year ago, and actually starting to get to that point of you're not just my coworker, you could actually be my friend. I can joke with you about these different levels of things because the things that I know about you and the things that you know about me, it's taken it beyond the hi, hello, are you? And
right.
so the increasing level of, I think, the tightness of your relationship is bound into how closely you let them into your internal circle of privacy management.
No, but you self-disclosed.
Self-disclosure, which we usually assume will be mutual. There's a lot of pressure on it
Yes.
for it to be mutual. It's one of the most
Yes.
universally cross-cultural.
I think that the biggest
It's hard and fast. It's pretty.
the biggest one for me for that one is you saying that I love you, and that person doesn't say it back.
Right. Obvious issue.
And then so the last one for it is boundary turbulence is when more than anything else. So Karen and I have this agreement about what we are sharing with each other, but then something happens outside of Karen's control. She gets subpoenaed, and now she has to tell everybody. And now that has been broken. It's outside of her really where she wanted it to go. And the boundary turbulence can definitely affect, you know, careers, relationships, other things. A good example of recent. So General Petraeus was a wonderful all-around sort of guy, and then it came out that he had this extramarital affair, and he had to step back from his position. But that boundary of information was broken outside of what either of them had wanted to do.
Right. And you can see lots of other examples on smaller scales as well. So, funny story that I usually tell to my TAs, and I get to tell somebody from the other point of view now. Fairbanks is this itty-bitty little tiny town, in case you hadn't noticed that yet. And so, along the lines of things that I officially am not allowed to know is that if I have a TA that cancels a class, I don't want to really have to play the enforcer on this, but I'm also don't want to know because officially I have to do something about that, right? I have to put down a hammer. The students from said TA's class were Monroe students, and so they go back to the school where they graduated from. My husband teaches there. I end up having to find out that my TA cancels her class because boundary turbulence. Right. And now I have to do something about it. All kinds of places where in Fairbanks, like that
Mm-hmm.
You can see, right? Somebody else will know the secret and will share the information while you're both present. And suddenly the co-ownership is all awkward
Weird.
and weird. Yeah. Messy and gross.
Have you read much about like data aggregators or information brokers, I want to say?
Not so much. Although there was an interesting case that came out where, so everybody's been data mined, you know, go if you have a Fred Meyer's rewards card, you get your little Fred Meyer's things back. It definitely knows what you've been purchasing because it gives you coupons for such things. There was a case where Target knew a girl was pregnant before her family was because they did a cross comparison of women that buy a whole bunch of supplements and lotion ended up on the baby registry. So she was sent all of these coupons for pregnancy and other sort of things, and it ended up being an issue because they had done the data mining, and you know it kind of breaks into you. And I think that telling somebody that you're pregnant is definitely one of those things where you really want to control that.
Yeah.
And I think
I would
that
like to own that.
yeah, and I think that that's really interesting in that ownership of it. But we kind of think, when I was going through this, I was thinking about celebrities, and we almost think that they don't own they have chosen this life. They have chosen to let their privacy go, in a way.
But then again, they don't even realize that all this whole boundary thing, they don't even know the boundaries. They thought that they could actually be pregnant and have a life, and not everyone would know.
Right.
And so it's funny for us to say, well, they chose that life, so they should know. And sometimes they don't always know, or they don't want to know, and they don't want it to be that way, and they don't believe it should be that way. I think
It's
they
not
should
even
get
just
that private
celebrities. It's
life.
actually true for any of us that work in organizations. You don't, right, there's a lot of places where we think we own information, where we'll feel territoriality about it. And the organization has entirely different ideas of
Yeah.
whose ownership that is. The classic examples that I know are from things like the CIA. The person who put together all the little signs suggesting that maybe so-and-so might be a spy, or suggesting that maybe so-and-so dictator is going to do X, Y, Z. Right? They put in a lot of work. They put together, they created a set of facts and put them in relation to suggest that the dictator is going to do chemical weapons or whatever. Those are almost always, when there are spies, it's because they did that kind of work. They put, right, the first things that get sold are the things where they put in the labor, and then it's theirs. And so if they choose to share it, and a lot of the times it's not even necessarily for money that you get spies, like the one for Puerto Rico. I can totally see where they're coming from. Like, does it count as spying when it's in Puerto Rico? When they're giving the information to Puerto Rico?
Mm-hmm.
But it does still count, because it's still not theirs. And so you get a lot of co-ownership issues with organizations. And that's true if you're working for a PR firm too, right? Any of those kinds of organizations, the ownership of the information is not yours to negotiate.
And I think that the self-disclosure one is, when crisis management sort of issues come out, is that this self-disclosure for somehow feels more positively, and that to own up to it, to not have it to come back to something else. So, having politicians, I think, coming out and owning what they had done, even if usually it's due to force, but whatever.
Right.
A funny little example, a lighter example. A way I used to encourage an atmosphere, an environment of honesty. Yes, in my home. I would say to my children, Mom's going to find out one way. God's going to tell me. Your friends are going to tell me. Somebody's going to tell me. So, and they were just really small. So I said, Mommy would really love it. And Mommy, it's always better if you tell me first. So if I hear it from you first, then this is negotiable. And I straight up told them, it's negotiable. But and forgive the reference, but if I pray about God tells me something, or your friend tells me something, or a friend of a friend tells me something, or I hear it from your dad first, I said, that's not negotiable. just not want what happens to you next. You'll regret it deeply. And it'll make it extremely regrettable. Promise you that. And so and they really did have a tendency to, Mom was going to find out, so they would tell me. Yeah.
Well, and I always think that it's like, how far into the boundary are you? I mean, if it's something like passersby, but it's your child, and therefore you feel like the boundaries around you are pretty darn thick. Like,
Right.
you should be able to be in that inner sanctum sort of thing. And when it feels like, okay, now there's a new boundary that I have been cut off from, and it almost feels like a hurt sort of a thing. And then why is there somebody else on that wall with you?
But I was coming from a completely different, I was trying to get across to them, it's just not worth lying, because somebody is either going to overhear it, and somebody somewhere is going to someday tattle on you. It was just an overall general premise to lay a framework of honesty in their entire life. Just to reiterate that all the time to them. It's just better to tell the truth. And but that was our philosophy in our home. Truth is better. I mean, it is better. But again, that was the philosophy in our home. And I was trying to make it global, not just, so they would learn this very territorial thing, but be able to apply it to everywhere else.
No little pictures on there. I figured that everybody loves their privacy, and then the girl in the picture, she does all of these weird design sort of things. So this was her privacy screen.
I think that's kind of funny. See, it looks like a purse, like a really cool purse.
Yeah, and so if you just need a moment to yourself, you just pull it up and over, and you're.
That's hilarious.
And I just thought it was funny.
It's her miniature happiness.
Felt like a fair vacation from
Yeah,
across the
that's funny.
in a weekend or something.
But notice that with none of this are we actually predicting future. What we're doing is trying to come up with explanations, I think, for the most part, as to understanding reactions.
Yeah.
Or at least to the extent that it predicts future. We're having to put in an extra set of assumptions, right? So, for example, the CIA now manages this differently on the basis of a different set of assumptions, right? They don't leave reports in the hands of single persons ever. They do teams
Yeah.
from the outset so that it's co-owned, and we reinforce each other's as privacy boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's never going to be one person's territory that they can own.
I think that the idea of packs are really entertaining.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Like,
Which is-
hacks or hacks.
So, like, if we in this room decided that we were going to make a pact, I think that the most media-sized public one was the pregnancy pact. So it was a group of girls in the high school, and they decided that they were all going to get pregnant together, and it was this big,
Yeah.
like, media storm.
Yeah.
But and it was like breaking the pact. Like, they had to get one of the girls to admit to what they were doing.
Yes.
But they felt that they had this co-ownership with each other, but to pull one of them out of it. That's why I was watching way too much Good Wife, but like when they separate two people who have that co-ownership together, and they tell the other one, they flipped on you.
Exactly.
Leonard, Kate told all of your secrets, so you might as well tell us, because we are, yeah.
You'll have to be more specific.
Yeah.
Right?
So,
I'm actually going to turn it over to Leonard to share secrets, or at least share what you found for data on definitions of theory. I'm going to make you also go to the board
Oh boy.
and write,
Okay.
please. You're welcome to take your notes with you.
Those are notes just for class.
Oh, okay.
The people I talked to about theory preferred the scientific theory more than anything else. So,
The other ones from our distant person, the interpersonal ones, all did that.
yeah. Like,
Proof.
so,
Prove it.
prove it under conditions X, Y, and Z, and make sure that it's repeatable.
Yes.
So,
about major?
The major was a political science
Oh,
major.
really?
Huh,
Yeah.
really?
Really?
So,
Yeah.
Why does that sound so surprising? Why am I reacting like that?
Because, were we just talking about that before?
Yeah.
Totally were.
Yeah, before everyone got in the classroom.
That's interesting.
Right.
What?
Chances of finding anything repeatable in politics. And indeed, why we wouldn't expect to find anything repeatable in politics if we're being rational. Because one of the things we know about politics is that because it's all taking place out in the open, right, everything influences everything. There is no such thing as an independent variable in
Once you
politics.
muddy that water, you can't unmuddy it.
Do you know what I mean?
Fresh pond again.
Like, the very fact that we did research suggesting that negative ads were reacted to differently
Mhm.
means that all of a sudden now, negative ads are their own separate, oh my gosh, you exist.
I do.
And so you couldn't begin to test or repeat anything in relation to negative ads, because the moment that research was done, it changed everything in relation to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Why I'm saying this is surprising coming from poli sci. I think, are they fairly new
yeah.
to the study of poli sci?
Well, they're undergraduates.
Yeah, but what year?
A freshman?
Sophomore? Senior?
I think senior.
Uh,
Well, they might have been going for a simple definition for me.
All right.
So,
Fine. I'm sorry, go ahead, what else?
so, and then they also they stated the common colloquial definition, but more of as a joke than
Oh,
anything.
interesting.
So,
The one about theory being the opposite of what happens in practice?
well, theory as being applied to anything that is, or like the colloquial use where theory isn't the opposite of what happens in practice, but it's just like
Unrelated.
gravity is a theory,
Okay.
things like that.
Okay.
So,
So some examples.
so
And you even spell it right.
thank you.
That's
Take
impressive.
that for granted. Okay.
So,
Do you have another one
And then-
also? Another thing?
well, another friend, like for physics, I know that a theory is virtually equivalent to a law.
Yeah.
Or,
Yep.
so like, pretty much until the universe turns over, it's very likely that we can't disprove this. So,
Yeah,
Although, in another way of looking at things, it's interesting that so many people think about scientific theories, given that or at least one study has suggested that if you take the entire course of history, 99% of our theories have been overturned or refined.
Refined, yeah. They have evolved.
They have changed.
I'm glad that medicine has done that a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, looking at the early
Let's
stuff
not
about
bloodlet
humors.
anyone ever again.
No leeches, please.
Yeah, please, let's not. No lobotomies, I think
Right.
those should be next to,
Yeah.
ixnay on a lobotomy leg.
Although they do funny things where they use maggots to clean out wounds and things.
Oh, no, that's good.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Those one sort of things I'm like, yeah, no, some things will just stick around.
like,
Yeah. Do you know how that was found out?
It's okay.
This poor little elderly woman had nobody home to double mastectomy. And they just
Oh,
sat
it's
around
universal
with the
representation,
patients,
as we usually
making
think
sure
of
there was somebody home
physicists
to take care of her.
talking about.
I'm making sure.
Uh-huh.
So
one of the things I hope that we can see from these definitions
Oh,
is that we do a lot of different
Still in.
things with theory.
sorry.
That's okay. It's okay. You can gross each other out all day long. I
Yeah.
don't mind. So for example, one of the things you'll notice on the syllabus is that the remainder of the syllabus lays out on every Wednesday, here's a different thing that we try to do with theory, right? We try to make our own lives better because we understand things differently, and so maybe we'll be more forgiving of friends who violate our privacy management boundaries. Or maybe we'll just be more careful about negotiating explicitly what our privacy management boundaries are going to be. Because now I have this theory that reminds me, okay, you can't just co-own this without having a little contractual negotiation here first. Other times we are trying to predict the future and perhaps even going so far as to control the future. So for example, the universality of self-disclosure rules means that I can often influence people. I can oftentimes get them to share information with me, but that establishment of intimacy means that now I can usually make people buy things. Right? Real practical. Predict future. If I disclose, you'll disclose. If we've now both disclosed, we have this greater level of trust. So when I tell you to buy X brand, you will. Facebook is great that way. Right. Other things that we try to do with theory, though, are oftentimes understanding others. Sometimes what we're trying to do with theory, and a definition like this one highlights for us the utility of theory in doing that, is just to force me to think about something in a different way. I'm feeling really stuck. I've got a problem. Maybe theory can help me get unstuck. I'm going to pick a theory different from the one that I usually run with, and I'm going to try to get out of my box. And that's one of the reasons why we like having multiple theories around us. Sometimes we use theories to try to change the world, i.e., I'm not trying to predict the future or predict what he's going to do. I'm not trying to understand what he's going to do. But I may be trying to get him to understand the world differently and change the world in that way, one by one.
And what I think is interesting is also the two different paradigms that exist of why theories in the first place. That's very interesting.
It is, and I'm sorry, I had actually, our distance person had contributed, one of the definitions from her friends was all about scientific evidence to prove it's got to be accredited. The other one, though, had said general theory is an explanation that doesn't have irrefutable evidence for why things are the way they are or why they happen the way they happen. And so that again highlights the ways in which it opens up rather than trying to define facts in relation. It's trying to pull more things in, oftentimes. All of which are valid goals, and you'll recognize that all of these definitions are primarily about what we do with theory. We define things in a lot of different ways. Most of the time when we have a dictionary definition, it's meant to first give what this is a general category of. So defining table, right? How do we define table? We start out by saying it's a piece of furniture.
We rest stuff on it. Lots of things.
Flat, level.
Right. And so we'll start out by saying it's a piece of furniture with legs and a flat level surface. So the general category and then the specific defining characteristics. Other times we define it in terms of use, which is what Leonard jumps to doing right away. Very applied, right? A theory is what we put things on. Well, all of a sudden now we have a lot of different tables around. And actually that's a really useful way to define. As a definition for theory, that's a really useful way to approach it. What do we do with it? You can define theory, you can define anything in other ways. We can talk about defining it by negative, which is what we were trying to do with our definition of communication, defining what it is not in order to figure out what it is. So, lots of strategies for achieving definition. Also useful when you are in arguments with people. The fact that we don't have agreement doesn't need to be a barrier to doing productive agreement as to what makes a good one. What does tend to be a barrier for defining what makes a good one is that these different definitions, these different uses, highlight really different criteria on which one would evaluate theory. And the textbook has gone through and laid out a couple of ways to differentiate across theories. They're using interpretive versus objective in chapter 2, which everybody read? Yes? Those are problematic categories, as we know, but let's start by running with those categories. So today's quiz asks you to reflect on that differentiation. My grad students have one extra quiz question in addition. You're going to run an argument for me now.
Oh, no, I'm gonna run 17 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah,
Oh.
sorry.
Well, okay, you can run literally, but she's looking at me anxiously with a reason.
Turn it on.
Ronnie, come on, I gave you homework before the class even started. You're supposed to have come up with arguments.
Sorry.
Wait, what?
Ronnie was supposed to come up with an argument to persuade me, and he has let all of y'all down, because he was supposed to persuade me why it should be a take-home quiz.
I forgot to even
Okay,
touch
and
on
this is
that.
time you just make this up on the spot and help us out here. So I suggest you do
Well-
that.
If you want to be able to understand my handwriting and or the spelling that it is involving, I have a wide variety, I will choose a word that is far dumbed down from the word that I actually want to implement because I probably can't spell implement.
Right,
Yeah.
the difficulties.
Yes.
We don't have such short notice to actually
Complete
persuade
our
and
thoughts.
complete our thoughts. So I think we need a little bit more time to give you a more better
Billy.
feeling of our quiz.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Okay.
Well-rounded.
Oh my God, that's beautiful.
But if we say that we will email them to you by 5 p.m. today? Could we do
I
that?
actually really don't feel the need to look at them at 5 p.m. today. I'm
Oh,
not
okay.
gonna do anything right now.
Friday.
Because it's Friday the 13th.
Oh,
And
no,
therefore-
Friday.
Oh, good. Okay, good. If you want
I'll take
if you want another quiz later on that's gonna ever again be take home, it can't be just Friday the 13th, and it can't be just the fact that I talk too long, because I
Oh.
do. I always do.
I always spell wrong. That's a given.
But yes.